My son stood there and watched his wife turn me into a stranger. Not across a courtroom, not beside a hospital bed, not in some ugly family argument where voices rise and people later pretend they were only angry. He did it in the clean afternoon light of a mall parking lot, with shopping bags waiting to be filled, his promotion still fresh on his face, and his wife's mother smiling, like she had been waiting years to see me put in my place. I had not come dressed to impress anybody. I wore a soft cream blouse, dark slacks, and the small pearl earrings Leonard gave me the year Damon graduated college. Nothing loud, nothing cheap, nothing begging to be noticed. I came because my son had called and said, "Mama, we're celebrating. I want everybody there. Everybody." That word sat differently later. My name is Henrietta Crowder, and I have learned that people reveal themselves most clearly when they think the moment belongs to them. Damon was standing near the entrance, laughing with Brandy, his chest lifted in that proud way men get when the world has just handed them a title. He looked handsome, successful. Like every sleepless night I had once swallowed had finally grown legs and walked into daylight. Brandy stood beside him, her hand tucked through his arm, smiling too hard. Louise Redding, her mother, kept adjusting the strap of her purse while watching me with a calm little satisfaction that made my skin go still before anybody spoke. I walked up smiling anyway. "Congratulations again, baby," I said. Damon's eyes came to me briefly. "Thanks, Mama." Briefly. That was the first cut, though I did not bleed yet. Brandy turned before I could take another step toward the glass doors. Her smile stayed in place, polished and pretty, but her voice lowered just enough to make the cruelty feel private. "Mrs. Crowder," she said, "please stay back and watch the car. This is for family only." The parking lot noise thinned around me. A cart rattled somewhere behind us. A child cried near the entrance. Somebody's car alarm chirped once and went quiet. But all I heard was that sentence settling between me and my son like a locked gate. Louise laughed softly. Not a surprised laugh, not nervous, satisfied. I looked at Damon, not at Brandy, not at Louise, at my son. I waited for instinct, for the small forward step, for his face to tighten, for his mouth to open before pride could stop it. I waited for the boy I raised to remember that I was not a guest, invited at the edge of his life. He looked away. Not long, just enough. Enough can ruin a woman differently than shouting ever could. Brandy adjusted her bracelet. "We won't be long," Louise added. "It's just easier this way." Damon still said nothing, so I nodded once. Not because I agreed, because some moments do not deserve the dignity of argument. I reached into my handbag, pulled out my phone, and ordered an Uber while they stood there pretending not to watch me do it. Brandy's mouth tightened, like she expected begging and did not know what to do with silence. Louise's smile faded a little. Damon checked the mall entrance as if the doors could save him from what he had just allowed. Those of you watching, tell me what time it is where you are, because some betrayals don't care whether the sun is up or the house is quiet. They arrive fully dressed and smiling. When the car pulled up, I opened the back door myself. Damon finally said, "Mama." I looked at him. That was all. Whatever he saw in my face made the rest of his sentence die before it reached me. The ride home was 23 minutes. I remember because I watched the route on the driver's screen instead of looking out the window. I did not cry. Crying would have made it too simple. This was not sadness alone. This was recognition. At home, I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet Leonard left behind. His chair sat near the window, angled the same way it had been for years. I lowered myself into it slowly, placed my handbag on the floor, and rested both hands on my knees. Then I let the truth come all the way in. He finally showed me who he's become. Now I have to decide what that means. Leonard used to say, loud people make the easiest mistakes because they announce where they're standing before they understand the room. That night, sitting in his chair with the quiet pressing around me, I heard his voice so clearly, almost turned my head. My father had taught me how to build with patience. He was a working man, the kind who came home with dust in the creases of his hands and still checked the porch step twice before letting my mother walk on it. My mother taught me the part he could not explain with tools. She taught me that people show their intentions in small movements, who they greet, who they overlook, who they become when they believe someone has no power. I carried both lessons into my marriage. Leonard Hayes did not chase attention. He could sit in a room full of rich men, say 5 sentences, and leave with the only agreement that mattered. We started small, savings first, then one property, then another, then a quiet investment in a local supplier most people ignored because the building looked tired from the road. Leonard saw structure where other people saw dust. "We don't need to look important," he told me one night at our kitchen table, papers spread between us. "We need to be correct." That became our way. We bought carefully, signed carefully, helped people carefully. Relationships mattered to Leonard, but not the kind built on favors shouted across dinner tables. He believed quiet trust traveled farther than public praise. By the time Damon was born, we had more than people assumed and less than careless people would have wasted. Damon came into the world with bright eyes and a strong little grip. Leonard held him like the boy was both a blessing and a responsibility heavy enough to respect. "We don't raise him to inherit comfort," he said. "We raise him to carry weight." So we made a decision before Damon could even say our names. He would never see the full weight of our help. He would only feel enough room to grow. We would open doors, but not push him through them. We would protect him from unnecessary harm, not from necessary lessons. Leonard said a man who sees every hand holding him up may never learn to stand straight. For years, I believed we had chosen wisely. Then one memory rose sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Damon was 17 when Leonard took us to a banquet downtown. He had just won an academic award and was wearing a navy suit he kept adjusting at the sleeves. A janitor passed near our table with a mop bucket, moving slowly because the floor near the service doors was wet. Damon, embarrassed by nothing and impressed with himself that night, muttered, "They should have cleaned this before important people arrived." The man heard him. So did Leonard. Leonard did not correct him at the table. He waited until the man walked away. Then he leaned toward Damon and said, low enough that only we could hear, "That man owned 2 buildings before you learned long division. He retired early, lost his wife, and came back to work because sitting home alone was killing him." Damon's face changed. Leonard's voice stayed even. "Don't ever let polish fool you. If you stop seeing people clearly, everything built around you becomes dangerous in your hands." Damon apologized that night, properly, humbly. I thought the lesson stayed. Now, years later, I stood from Leonard's chair and walked to the cabinet beneath the bookcase. My fingers found the folder I had not opened since his passing. Damon Crowder was written across the tab. I held it for a long moment. Then I slid it onto the table and kept my hand on top of it. Not yet. The first time Damon forgot a man's name, I told myself he was tired. It happened outside the company warehouse after a small employee luncheon. Nothing important. Paper plates, folding tables, the kind of gathering where people who do the real work stand a little straighter because someone finally noticed them. A gray-haired supervisor stepped toward Damon with both hands open, pride sitting plainly on his face. He had trained my son during one of his earliest rotations, back when Damon still came home smelling like cardboard, coffee, and something honest. "Damon," the man said, smiling. Look at you now. Damon nodded, polite, composed. Appreciate it, sir. Sir, not Mr. Alvin. Not the man who had stayed 2 hours after closing, walking him through inventory flow because Damon hated admitting he didn't understand it the first time. Just, sir. The supervisor's smile held. 1 second too long. Then it settled into something smaller. I saw it. Damon didn't. That was how it began. Not with cruelty, with distance. For years, he had been different. He used people's names like they mattered. He thanked waitresses without looking past them. He called older neighbors ma'am, in a way that felt natural, not performed. He noticed when someone carried too much and took it from them without making a moment out of it. That was the boy Leonard and I raised. But boys don't change all at once. They shift. And sometimes the shift looks like growth until you pay closer attention. The circles around Damon began to change. Better suits, cleaner shoes, lunches that ran longer than they needed to, filled with men who used words like access and alignment when they meant control. He started standing differently, not taller, but measured, speaking slower, waiting for laughter before he smiled, like timing mattered more than truth. I was proud at first. A mother can mistake polish for maturity when she wants to believe the foundation held. Then the language changed. Important people will be there, Mama. It's not really your kind of room. Brandy says presentation matters. He said those things gently. That was the problem. Gentleness can carry a blade further than anger ever could. Brandy never corrected him directly. That was her strength. She shaped him sideways. If I wore something simple, she smiled and said, "Comfort is important at your age." If Damon mentioned bringing me somewhere, she tilted her head slightly and asked, "Will she enjoy that kind of crowd?" Not should she come. Never that. She used concern the way some women use perfume, light enough to deny, strong enough to stay. Louise Redding was not as careful. At a dinner I attended months before the mall, she leaned back in her chair after Damon mentioned a charity event and said, casually enough to pass as observation, "Family image becomes more important as a man rises. People notice who stands beside him." The table didn't react. Damon laughed, like it was nothing. I watched Brandy touch his wrist under the table, not to correct him, to steady him. That was the second shift. They weren't just influencing how he moved, they were teaching him what to value, who belonged in the room, who improved the room, who could be displayed, who could be managed, who could be overlooked. I saw it, but I didn't name it yet, because naming something makes it real. And once it's real, you have to decide what to do about it. A week later, Damon came by the house to pick up a document he needed for work. He moved through the rooms quickly, like the place existed for his use, not his attention. I stopped him before he reached the door. "Be careful around people who praise you too early," I said. "They're not always seeing you clearly." He kissed my cheek, but his eyes were already on his phone. "Mama, that's old school thinking," he said. "Things move differently now." Old school. He didn't say it with disrespect. That would have been easier to correct. He said it like a man who had already placed me somewhere behind him. That word stayed longer than it should have. Not because it hurt, because it explained something. He wasn't just moving forward. He was reorganizing where I stood in his life while doing it. After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car pull away. The brake lights flickered once at the end of the street. Then he was gone. I stayed there longer than necessary, trying to find something I had missed, not a moment, a pattern. I went back through memory carefully. The names he stopped saying, the pauses he didn't notice, The conversations that shifted just slightly out of reach. The way he began seeing some people clearly and others not at all. I tried to remember the last time Damon looked at me and saw more than comfort, more than history, more than a place he could return to without thinking about what it cost. I couldn't find it. Not because it wasn't there, because I had allowed too many small moments to pass without marking them. That was the truth I had been avoiding. He hadn't changed suddenly. He had been changing in front of me, and I had called it growth. By Sunday morning, the pain had cooled into something more useful. That was the danger of pain. If you let it stay sharp, it makes noise for you. It makes you reach for the phone, call people who have already shown you what they value, ask questions you already know the answers to, demand apologies from mouths that will only reshape the truth to protect themselves. I had lived too long to hand my dignity to that kind of panic. So I made coffee, opened the blinds, sat at my dining table with the folder still closed beside me. The house was quiet in a way that did not comfort. It pressed. The mall had wounded me, but it had not surprised me. That was the part I could not ignore. Surprise is easier to forgive. It allows you to tell yourself something broke in a moment, something temporary, something you can repair by speaking it out loud. But this had been forming. Damon's silence had not been sudden. It had been practiced. The missed names, the careless language, the way he had begun treating quiet people like background noise, the way Brandy's ideas had slipped into his thinking until he sounded like a man rehearsing a life instead of living one. I had seen it. I had adjusted around it. That was my part. I rested my hand on the folder without opening it. Not yet. Because I needed to be certain of one thing before I touched anything that could not be undone. I was not acting because I was hurt. I was acting because something had been confirmed. That difference matters. Around noon, I stood and walked to Leonard's old writing desk. The drawer opened with the same soft resistance it always had, like it still expected his hand instead of mine. Inside, I reached past the folder with Damon's name and pulled out a slimmer file, the one with the company seal. I held it for a moment longer than necessary. I had never wanted to sit in judgment over my own son. That would have defeated the entire purpose of letting him grow without leaning on what we built. Leonard had been clear about that from the beginning. Don't let him inherit the illusion of strength, he told me once. Let him earn the weight of it. So I stayed where I believed I belonged, not in front of Damon's path, not behind it, just outside it. But outside does not mean absent. That was the mistake people make when they confuse silence with distance. Leonard's estate did not disappear when he did. It held voting shares, advisory weight, recorded authority that did not require presence to exist. I remained a founding investor and board advisor, not publicly, not performatively, but structurally. My name did not open meetings. It closed decisions, the kind of position that does not introduce itself unless it needs to. And 3 months earlier, it had needed to. I sat back down and opened the file. The review summary was still exactly where I had left it. The first line had unsettled me then. It unsettled me more now. Judgment concerns escalating under increased responsibility, not incompetence. That would have been easier. Not laziness. That could have been corrected. This was something else, something quieter. Risky approvals made too quickly. Compliance warnings answered late. A lower-level employee reporting that Damon had spoken to him like the room had no witnesses. Too much reliance on informal connections during formal processes. Too much confidence that charm could replace structure. I had read it all before. I had closed the file, and I had chosen time. The committee had recommended escalation. I had asked them to wait. Not as his mother. I told myself that at the time, as someone who believed pressure reveals a man before it defines him. I believed Damon would feel the shift, that he would steady himself, that he would recognize what was slipping before it became habit. I believed he would correct course. Instead, he had gone shopping. That thought stayed longer this time, not because it was dramatic, because it was precise. While the ground beneath him was already moving, he had been focused on how things looked above it. I closed the file slowly, and for the first time since Saturday, something inside me resisted. Not the decision, the finality of it. I looked toward Leonard's chair. There are moments when love tries to bargain. Just one more conversation, just one more warning, just one more chance to protect instead of expose. I let that thought sit. Then I asked myself the only question that mattered. If I speak now, am I correcting him? Or am I protecting him from something he needs to face? The answer came quietly, too quietly to argue with. I reached for my phone. Marlon Reeves answered on the second ring. Mrs. Crowder. His tone told me everything. He had been waiting too. Has the committee's recommendation changed? I asked. A pause. Paper shifting. No, ma'am. If anything, Friday's supplemental notes strengthened it. Friday. While we were in that parking lot, I closed my eyes briefly. That timing was not coincidence. That was confirmation. This had already moved. I had only decided when to stop standing in front of it. Then proceed according to policy, I said. Marlon did not respond immediately. Are you certain? He asked. That was respect, not hesitation. I looked at Leonard's chair again. No, I said. Then I added, but I am clear. That was the truth. Clarity does not always feel like certainty. Sometimes it feels like loss. After the call, I sat there for a long time without moving. Not because I doubted what I had done, because I understood what it meant. This was the moment love changes its position, from shield to witness. By evening, the house had settled back into its quiet. At 6:14, I picked up my phone again. This time, there was nothing left to weigh, no room for delay, no reason to soften what had already been earned. I sent Marlon 3 words. Monday. Proceed accordingly. By Sunday night, I could not sleep because memory kept bringing me receipts I had never planned to cash. Damon's life had not been handed to him. I would never tell that lie, not even in pain. He earned his grades. He sat through interviews with his palms damp and his answers steady. He came home from his first entry-level rotation with sore feet and a tired smile. Proud, because nobody had treated him like anybody's child. That mattered. I never wanted a weak son standing on a strong last name. Leonard would not have tolerated that either. A door opened too wide, he used to say, can make a man forget how to knock. So I opened doors quietly, not to carry him, to position him. When Damon applied for his first internship, I did not call and demand anything. I simply made sure his application was actually read. After that, he stood on his own. He interviewed, he answered, he proved himself. That was the balance. Access without advantage. When he struggled under a supervisor who believed pressure mattered more than guidance, I did not remove the pressure. I adjusted the environment around it. I asked Marlon Reeves to place someone steady within reach. That was how Damon met Mr. Alvin. He believed it was scheduling. I knew it was intervention. Quiet enough not to weaken him, firm enough not to let him fail for the wrong reasons. When a senior mentor took an interest in him, Damon believed it was chemistry. Part of it was. The man respected his drive. But I had spoken for Damon's character before that meeting ever happened. In business, character travels further than performance, especially when no one is announcing it. That mentor opened doors. Damon walked through them. Both things were true. They had to be. Because the goal was never to make Damon successful. It was to make him worthy of success without depending on it being arranged for him. That was the infrastructure. Not money, not access, alignment, structure, quiet correction before visible failure. That was why the recent review felt different. 6 months earlier, Damon had been given responsibility that did not come with attention. A vendor approval process, not glamorous, not visible, but important. The kind of work that reveals whether a man respects structure when no one is watching him perform. I read the briefing when it crossed my advisory packet. I saw the risks immediately. Fast timeline, familiar names, a vendor connected, socially, not formally, to Louise Redding through one of those charity circles she moved through so carefully. That connection alone did not make the process wrong, but it required discipline, distance, documentation. My hand went to the phone that day. Then I heard Leonard's voice in my memory. Let the boy stand. So I did. Damon had enough training to slow the process down. Enough judgment to ask questions. Enough authority to refuse anything that did not meet structure. Instead, he moved quickly. Approved too easily. Accepted verbal assurances where written confirmation was required. Dismissed a compliance note as procedural delay. That was not failure. That was erosion. The deal did not collapse. That would have been simpler. It wobbled. Invoices needed correction. A junior analyst had to chase missing documentation. A lower-level employee raised concerns and was treated like an inconvenience. The company did not lose much money, but it lost something more important: confidence. And confidence, once questioned, does not return quietly. I had seen the report. I had seen Damon's name beside words no mother wants connected to her child. Dismissive tone, judgment concern, informal pressure, not dramatic, not criminal, but structural. Still, I delayed escalation. I told myself he needed time. That growth often looks uneven before it steadies. That the boy who once apologized to a man he had misjudged could still recognize himself before it became habit. So I gave him space, not to avoid consequence, to meet it early enough to correct it. Then the parking lot happened. And in that silence, I understood what the report had been trying to tell me. Not that Damon was incapable, but that he had started relying on something he did not understand. Access without awareness, position without weight, confidence without structure. What he was losing was not something I had given him. It was something he had never learned to hold on his own. And without me, it would not hold at all. Monday morning did not arrive loud. It arrived clean. That was what made it worse. The company lobby carried on like nothing in the world had shifted. Polished floors, measured footsteps, security scanning badges with the same quiet rhythm. A receptionist answering calls with practiced calm, her tone steady enough to make it seem like nothing important ever broke between one greeting and the next. That was the first lie. Real damage rarely announces itself. It settles into rooms that already look stable. I had not come there to watch my son unravel. Monday mornings were reserved for advisory review, quiet, scheduled, and rarely attended in person unless something required it. For years, I had handled it through reports, summaries, and written notes passed through Marlon Reeves and the committee. Presence was not necessary when structure was intact, but structure had already shifted. So I came in myself. I stood just outside the glass doors, positioned where reflection worked better than proximity. Close enough to see without being seen. Close enough to understand before anyone tried to explain. Damon stood near the elevators in a charcoal suit, one hand in his pocket, his phone resting loosely in the other. Brandy had dressed him for the life he believed had finally opened. His collar sat sharp. His shoes carried a fresh shine. His posture held that slight lift men get when the world has just confirmed something they were hoping to believe about themselves. He looked ready to be seen. What he did not look like was a man already under review. Marlon Reeves stepped out of the side corridor holding a cream envelope. Nothing about it was dramatic. No stamp in red. No urgent markings. Just thick paper, sealed properly. The kind used when a matter has already been decided before it reaches your hands. "Mr. Crowder," Marlon said. Damon turned, surprised by the tone more than the call. "Morning, Marlon." Marlon did not return the familiarity. "This was finalized late Friday. Please review it before your 10 o'clock. Finalized. Not prepared. Not discussed. Finalized. Damon took the envelope slower now. I watched his thumb slide beneath the seal. I watched his shoulders shift before his eyes finished the first paragraph. That is how you know when paper has done its job. The body understands before the mind can argue. He read the header once, then again. Then he moved lower. Leadership track designation. Provisional pending final compliance clearance. Review committee findings. Active prior to promotion notice. Independent approval authority. Suspended, effective immediately. Supervisory oversight assigned. Performance remediation required under documented judgment concerns. The language did not accuse. That was what made it final. Damon turned the page too quickly, then slowed as if pacing could change what he was reading. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved back to the top, searching for something he could reinterpret. There was nothing to reinterpret. Paper, when written, correctly leaves no space for interpretation. Only acceptance. Marlon stayed where he was, not close enough to comfort, not distant enough to ignore, just present in the way institutions remain present when they have already spoken. "I was promoted Friday," Damon said, his voice lower now. Marlon did not shift. The announcement was conditional. The review was already under executive hold. That landed harder, because it removed the illusion. This had not happened to him overnight. This had been waiting. I saw the moment it reached him, not fully, but enough to unsettle him properly. Not embarrassment. Not yet. Something quieter. Fear. Not of losing money. Not of losing position. Fear that he had been standing on something unstable longer than he realized. That was when I moved. I opened the glass door and stepped inside. The air changed in the way it always does when recognition moves faster than introduction. The receptionist looked up first. "Good morning, Mrs. Crowder." The security guard straightened slightly. "Morning, ma'am." Two senior staff members near the elevators adjusted without being told. One stepped aside. Another gave a small nod. The kind that belongs to people who understand structure without needing it explained. Not performance. Memory. That was the second lie of the morning undone. Damon heard it. He turned before I reached him. Not fully, just enough. Enough to see the room shift around me in a way it had never shifted around him. I did not look at him immediately. I walked the way I always walk. Steady, measured, not asking for space, not acknowledging it either. Not because I needed to prove anything. Because nothing needed proving. Marlon inclined his head. "Mrs. Crowder." "Mr. Reeves," I said. No more than that. No explanation offered. None needed. Damon looked between us then. The envelope still open in his hand. The paper no longer just paper. I could see the question forming behind his eyes. But pride had not loosened its grip yet. Not yet. He was still trying to place the moment inside something smaller. A misunderstanding. A mistake. Bad timing. Anything but what it was. His face had gone pale in a way no mother wants to see and every woman with sense must sometimes allow. I stopped when I reached him, not directly in front, slightly to the side, close enough that he could not pretend I was not part of what he was holding. Our eyes met. For 1 second, I saw the boy. For the next 2, I saw the man trying to protect himself from what the boy would have understood immediately. I held his gaze. 3 seconds. Long enough. Then I moved past him. Not fast. Not slow. Just forward. Behind me, I heard nothing. No question. No protest. No mama. Only the quiet sound of paper settling back into his hand. By the time I reached the boardroom door, I did not need to turn around to know what had finally begun. Not the consequence. The understanding that the consequence had been waiting long before the envelope ever touched his hand. Brandy did not call me that morning. That told me she was thinking. A woman like Brandy does not move toward answers directly. She moves around them first, tests the edges, presses against walls to see which ones shift. She looks for softer doors before she ever risks knocking on one that might not open. By noon, I knew she had started. No one had to tell me. The office has its own language, a tightening, a subtle shift in how people speak, how quickly conversations end, how certain names begin to move carefully instead of freely. When someone outside the structure starts pulling at threads they don't understand, the building responds before anyone says a word. Damon left before lunch, not loudly. That would have been easier. He walked out with the envelope folded inside his jacket like it had weight now, like it had settled into him in a way he could not shake off. Brandy was waiting outside. I watched them through the boardroom window, their reflections broken slightly by the glass. She reached for his arm. He pulled back, not sharply, just enough. That small distance said more than any argument. Her hand stayed in the air for half a second longer than it should have. That was the first thing she didn't expect. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Her mouth moved. Review. Then again. Signed. Then, who? Damon shook his head once. Not answering. Not explaining. That was the second thing she didn't expect. Brandy looked up then, not at the doors, not at the people moving in and out, up at the building itself, not admiring it, measuring it, like she had just realized something important. This place did not respond to her. By early afternoon, she called Louise. Louise did not panic. Women like Louise do not raise their voices when something shifts beneath them. They lower everything, tone, pace, expectation. They make the room feel controlled, even when they are still trying to understand where control has already been lost. But control is not the same as certainty. I heard enough of that conversation later, not because it was meant for me, but because people who believe they are speaking privately often forget how thin walls can be when information starts moving. "Mama, this wasn't normal," Brandy said, her voice tighter now. "They had paperwork ready. It was already decided." Louise did not answer immediately. That pause was not confusion. It was calculation. "Then you don't ask what happened," she said finally. "You find out who had the authority to let it happen." "I thought you knew people there." Another pause. "I know people around it," Louise said. "That's not the same." That difference mattered. Brandy just hadn't learned it yet. Over the next 2 hours, she started learning it the only way people like her do, by testing access. She did not begin with power. She began with proximity. She called a man from a charity committee, someone who had once laughed too loudly at one of Louise's stories over dinner. He answered politely, listened just long enough to understand what she was asking, then told her, carefully, that internal review matters were not discussed outside appropriate channels. Polite. Closed. She adjusted. She called Damon's former mentor. No answer. That was an answer. She adjusted again. She called someone in events, someone who handled guest lists, donor seating, and social arrangements. Not decisions, not process, but close enough to hear things pass by. This time, she didn't ask directly. She circled. "Do board advisors usually attend internal reviews?" she asked, light enough to sound curious. The woman hesitated. Too long. "That depends," she said. "On what?" She didn't answer that part. She didn't need to. That pause gave Brandy something more useful than information. It gave her direction. That was when my name began moving. Not loudly. Never loudly. It moved the way structure moves, quietly through the right people, in the right places. Legacy shares, advisory vote, review committee, founder's estate, widow. Each word reached her the same way, not as answers, as limits. By 4 o'clock, she had stopped asking casual questions. She started placing calls. She called Patricia Bell. That was not a mistake. That was a decision. Because by then, Brandy understood something clearly. If there was authority in the room, Patricia would know where it sat. "Patricia, this is Brandy Crowder, Damon's wife." "I know who you are," Patricia said. Not warm, not cold, just placed. "I'm trying to understand a situation that affects my husband," Brandy said, softening her voice just enough to sound reasonable. "That would be something Damon should discuss with the appropriate internal parties," Patricia replied. A pause. Then Brandy shifted. Not careless, deliberate. "Well, since this seems to involve family," she said, "I think I have a right to know who authorized it." There it was. Not emotion, positioning, testing whether personal access could reach where process had already closed. "No, ma'am," Patricia said. "You do not." The air changed right there, not because Brandy was refused, because she was refused cleanly. No hesitation, no explanation, no opening. Her tone tightened. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. My mother—" That was the mistake. Not mentioning Louise, using her as leverage. Patricia let her finish. Did not interrupt, did not correct. Just listened. Then ended the call properly, logged it, documented it, and called me 5 minutes later. Her voice was steady, but underneath it, there was something else. Not fear, not urgency. Recognition. "Mrs. Crowder," she said, "your daughter-in-law is asking the right questions, in the wrong way." I looked down at the closed folder on my desk. That question had been coming. It had just arrived sooner than Brandy intended. Patricia waited. She understood timing. Then she asked, "How would you like me to respond?" I didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment where curiosity becomes interference, and interference, when handled correctly, becomes record. I rested my hand lightly on the folder. Then I said, "You will respond the way you would to anyone without standing." A pause. Patricia understood. "Yes, ma'am." I ended the call and sat there for a moment longer. Brandy thought she was asking questions. What she had actually done was map the edges of a system that had already closed to her, and then step far enough inside it to be remembered. Damon came to my house at 7:32 that evening and knocked like a man who still believed the door belonged to him. Not loud, not disrespectful, just certain. I watched him through the front window before opening it. His tie hung loose around his neck. His collar was bent where his hand had pulled at it too many times. The envelope was still in his left hand, creased now, not from reading, but from holding. He looked tired, but not humbled. Not yet. "Mama," he said. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in without hesitation, the way familiarity lets people forget they are entering a space they have already unsettled. He stopped near Leonard's chair for a second, just long enough to notice it. then shifted his weight away from it like something there was watching him too closely. That told me enough. You knew, he said. No greeting, no pause, just accusation dressed as certainty. I closed the door behind him. Sit down, Damon. I don't want to sit. Then stand. That irritated him. I saw it move across his face before he pressed it down. He wasn't here to fight yet. He was here to control the shape of the conversation. He lifted the envelope slightly. Why didn't you warn me? There it was. Not an apology. Not confusion. A complaint. I walked to the side table and turned off the lamp near the window. The room dimmed just enough to quiet the edges. Warn you about what? I asked. His eyes narrowed. Don't do that. Do what? Act like you don't know what I'm talking about. I want to hear you say it. He exhaled sharply and ran a hand over his mouth. The review, he said. Marlon, the committee, whatever this is. He gestured with the envelope. And your part in it? My part, I repeated. He hesitated, just for a moment. That was new. Then he pushed through it. People were greeting you like... He stopped, searching for something that wouldn't make him sound smaller. Like what? I asked. His jaw tightened. Like you matter there. That should have landed harder, but some truths don't strike when they're spoken. They settle. I see, I said. He started pacing then. 2 steps, turn, 2 steps back. Not far, just enough movement to keep from standing still with what he was beginning to understand. Brandy is upset, he said. Her mother is asking questions. They're trying to figure out what happened. Are they? He stopped. Yes. I sat down slowly, not in Leonard's chair, across from it. How does it look to them? I asked. He let out a breath. It looks like I got promoted Friday and humiliated Monday. Humiliated? You know what I mean. No, I said evenly. I want to hear what you mean. That shifted something. His voice sharpened. People are talking. This affects my reputation. It affects Brandy. Her family was proud. We had plans, commitments. I just signed a lease. We're supposed to host people next month. He stopped, like he had said enough to prove something. I held his gaze. Host people, I repeated. His frustration broke properly then. Mama, what? Stop doing that. Doing what? Repeating everything like I sound ridiculous. I looked at him carefully. For a second, I saw the boy who used to bring me broken toys because he trusted me to fix them. But the man standing in front of me had not brought something broken. He had brought something exposed. You didn't come here because you're confused, I said. His eyes snapped to mine. I came because my mother was involved in something that could damage my career. Your career was already damaged by your choices. That hit. Not loudly, but directly. He stepped back slightly, like the words had moved toward him. So this is about Saturday, he said. I let the silence answer first. He filled it. This is about what happened at the mall. Still no apology. Still no ownership. Just positioning. Saturday didn't create anything, I said. It revealed it. That slowed him. Not stopped. Slowed. What are you talking about? He asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. He watched me, waiting, then shifted again. You could have helped me. There it was again. Not I made a mistake. Not I should have done better. You could have helped me. I did, I said. For years. He let out a short, humorless breath. That's not what this feels like. No, I said quietly. It wouldn't. He shook his head, frustration rising again, but thinner now, less certain. You don't understand how this looks out there. Brandy thinks what? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation carried more truth than anything he had said so far. She thinks this was personal, he said finally. And you? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the envelope, then back at me. I think... He stopped. That was the first crack. Not enough to break him. Enough to let doubt in. I think this didn't have to happen like this, he said. That was as far as he could go. For that to be true, I said, it would have had to start on Monday. He frowned. What does that mean? It means this didn't begin there. The room held that. He stared at me, trying to follow something he had not been paying attention to. The clock ticked between us. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Then, quieter now, but still holding on to something, he said, I don't even know who you are right now. I stood, not abruptly, just enough. No, Damon, I said. That is the first honest thing you've said. He didn't argue. That was new. He turned and walked out, not slamming the door, but not closing it gently either. Something in between. Unsettled. I watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway. The movement wasn't smooth. He adjusted once, then again. Before the car aligned with the road, even that had changed. He came to confront the consequence. But he wasn't ready to understand the cause. Not yet. Louise Redding had not laughed in that parking lot because she misunderstood me. That was what made it dangerous. A foolish woman laughs at what she does not know. Louise was not foolish. She had the polished patience of somebody who watched rooms carefully and only spoke when she believed the floor had already been measured. She noticed more than Brandy did. She noticed how certain people softened when I entered. She noticed how Marlon Reeves lowered his voice around me. She noticed how older executives at fundraisers greeted me with a familiarity that did not match the simplicity of my dress. She noticed. She just interpreted it incorrectly. Louise believed that if power did not introduce itself, it must be fading. What she failed to understand was this. Real power does not fade. It recedes. And when it recedes, it becomes harder to measure. I learned the full shape of her gamble from Patricia Bell the next morning. Patricia did not gossip. She documented. That was why Leonard trusted her, and why I did too. She didn't call just anyone, Patricia said. I was standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, watching steam rise from untouched tea. She called Mr. Ashford. Winston Ashford? I asked. Yes, ma'am. That was not careless. That was chosen. Winston sat near the outer edge of the board's advisory circle, friendly enough with everyone, present in the right rooms, trusted enough to be included, but not anchored enough to carry weight alone. Accessible. That was what Louise saw. Accessible meant influence to someone like her. What did she say? I asked. Patricia paused, choosing clean words. She didn't begin with the review, she said. She began with concern. Of course she did. Concern travels further than accusation. She framed Damon as a rising executive under unusual pressure, Patricia continued, then suggested the timing of the review, following a family incident, might indicate emotional interference. I almost smiled. Not because it amused me, because it confirmed her. Louise had not attacked the decision. She had attacked the perception of it. That was more sophisticated and more dangerous. Did Winston engage? I asked. Yes, ma'am. That mattered. How far? Another pause. He asked for clarification, Patricia said. Specifically whether any advisory influence intersected with the review timeline. There it was. Not agreement, not support, but enough curiosity to open a door. For a brief moment, Louise had done exactly what she intended. She had introduced doubt into a room that respects structure. And in rooms like that, doubt is not dismissed. It is examined. I said nothing. Patricia understood silence. She implied Patricia continued carefully, that reputational concerns could arise if the matter appeared personal. There it was again. Not a threat. A suggestion. Placed just carefully enough to be denied later, but clear enough to register. That was Louise at her best. Controlled, measured, strategic. Did Winston move it forward? I asked. No, ma'am. That answer came faster. He redirected the concern to compliance for verification, Patricia said, as protocol requires. Of course he did. Winston did not have power, but he understood where it lived, and more importantly, he understood where it did not belong. What did compliance find? I asked. Nothing, she said. No advisory interference. No irregularity in timeline. The review record was already complete before the promotion notice. Clean, closed, documented. The kind of answer that does not argue. It removes. And once it removes, there is nothing left to discuss. Winston responded accordingly, Patricia added. He informed her that the matter had been reviewed and no further inquiry was appropriate. Proper, polite, final. But not before Louise had accomplished something important. She had reached the edge of the system and touched it. That was more than most people like her ever manage. The problem was what came next. Because systems like ours do not react emotionally to pressure, they record it. Was the call logged? I asked. Yes, ma'am. Of course it was. It would be. Not as a violation, not as a warning, as context. And context inside institutions has a way of resurfacing at the exact moment it becomes relevant. I set my tea in the sink untouched and looked toward the closed folder on the dining table. Louise had not made a foolish move. She had made a calculated one. She had identified the weakest visible link and applied pressure where she believed the structure might bend. For a moment, it almost did. That was the part people misunderstand about women like Louise. They are not wrong because they are careless. They are wrong because they measure the wrong things. She saw proximity. She assumed access. She saw conversation. She assumed influence. She saw a man who answered her call and believed he could carry her concern further than it deserved to go. What she did not see was where the structure actually began. Leonard never built anything that depended on being liked. He built things that depended on being correct. Shares, voting rights, advisory records, signed minutes, names placed where they mattered, not where they could be reached. Louise had mistaken visibility for leverage, and for a brief moment, she believed she had found the right door. What she had actually done was knock on a door that does not open outward. By noon, Patricia forwarded the call note into the appropriate file. Nothing dramatic happened. No one confronted Louise, no one warned her twice, no one needed to. That was the part people like her never understand. When real systems begin answering, they do not raise their voice. They adjust their memory. And once you are inside that memory, you do not need to be stopped. You only need to be remembered. I dried my hands slowly and looked toward the closed folder again. Louise had not laughed because she was ignorant. She had laughed because she believed she had measured the room correctly. And for a moment, she almost had. The folder felt heavier once I finally opened it. Not because of the paper. Paper is only heavy when it carries somebody's future and somebody else's faith. I sat at the dining table after Louise's call note came through, the house quiet enough for me to hear the soft scrape of the folder tab under my thumb. Damon Crowder. Leonard's handwriting was not on the tab, but his intention was in everything inside it. The first page was a transition outline, not a gift. An outline. That mattered. Leonard had never believed in handing a grown person a crown and calling that preparation. The plan was careful. Staged transfer of legacy shares over time, not all at once. Advisory exposure before authority. Financial trust access tied to conduct, service, and clean review records. A possible executive development sponsorship if Damon proved he could lead without needing attention to confirm his worth. There were notes in the margins from years ago. Mine, Leonard's, some typed, some written quickly during late nights when our son was still young enough to sleep with one hand curled under his cheek. Prepare him for stewardship, not entitlement. I pressed my fingers against that sentence until my nail whitened. Leonard had underlined it twice. A smaller envelope slipped from between the pages and landed near my wrist. I knew what it was before I opened it. Leonard had written several letters in his final year, not dramatic ones, not goodbye speeches. Practical letters. Clear letters. The kind a man writes when he knows love must one day survive without his voice. This one was addressed to me. Henrietta, if you are reading this because you are uncertain, then slow down. Love does not require blindness. Legacy does not require surrender. If our son is ready, open the way. If he is not, make him ready. If he refuses, protect what was built. I set the letter down because my eyes had gone hot, and I did not want tears falling on Leonard's words. That was the cruel part of motherhood no one explains cleanly. Sometimes loving a child means remembering who they were so fiercely that you almost betray the truth of who they are becoming. Damon was still my child. The same boy who once brought me wildflowers from the edge of a parking lot because he said the store flowers looked too arranged. The same boy who stayed awake during Leonard's last hospital night because he thought sleep would make him miss his father's breathing. The same boy who had apologized to that retired executive with shaking hands and a lowered head. That boy had not vanished, but he had been covered by status, by applause, by Brandy's careful measuring, by Louise's polished hunger, by his own comfort. And now the folder asked me the question I had avoided since Saturday. Do I give him what we planned because I love him? Or do I hold it back because I do? I turned to the final section. Trustee notes. Review benchmarks. A blank line where my signature would begin the next phase. My pen sat beside the folder. I picked it up. For one long second, I let myself imagine the easier version. Sign it. Restore the path. Tell myself the mall was only a moment. Tell myself embarrassment had taught him enough. Let motherhood do what it always wants to do. Cover, soften, repair. Then I saw Damon looking away in that parking lot. My hand stilled. I placed the pen back down. I closed the folder carefully, both palms resting on top of it like I was holding a door shut. Not yet, I whispered. Then, after a breath, but not never. Brandy made the mistake desperate people make when they still believe volume can replace authority. She didn't start with noise. She started with strategy. That was what made it dangerous. She put it in writing. And once something is written inside a system like ours, it stops belonging to the person who sent it. But before it stopped belonging to her, it moved. By Tuesday afternoon, Patricia Bell called me again. Her voice carried that careful stillness professionals use when something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, but not before it has been fully observed. "Mrs. Crowder," she said, "there's been a formal complaint." I was in Leonard's study, the folder closed beside my elbow. I didn't touch it. "From Damon?" I asked. "No, ma'am. From his wife." That landed exactly where I expected it to. Not surprising, but not yet final. Because sometimes damage does not come from being wrong. It comes from being just believable enough to slow a system down. Patricia continued. She submitted it to HR, copied Mr. Ashford, Mr. Reeves, and executive compliance. That part mattered. Not who she copied, that she reached high enough to be taken seriously. She wasn't asking questions anymore. She was placing doubt. What did she claim? I asked. A slight pause, paper shifting. She stated that Mr. Crowder's demotion appears to be influenced by unresolved family tension and outside pressure from a legacy stakeholder. Outside pressure. I looked toward the window. She used those words? I asked. Yes, ma'am. She also referenced her mother's relationships with community donors and suggested there could be reputational consequences if the matter is not reviewed independently. There it was, not just a complaint, a positioning move, carefully shaped, carefully placed, carefully dangerous, because in the wrong room, with the wrong timing, those words could have forced a pause, and a pause inside a system like ours can look like doubt. Patricia's voice lowered slightly. It reached compliance before it was categorized. That mattered more than anything else she had said. Because for a brief window, Brandy's words were not dismissed. They were considered. I said nothing. Patricia understood silence. Executive compliance requested supporting documentation, she added. They asked whether any advisory influence had intersected with the review timeline. That was the moment, not the complaint. The question. Because once that question exists, it has to be answered, not emotionally. On paper. And, I asked, a soft exhale. They found none. Clean, direct, documented. The kind of answer that doesn't argue, it closes. They logged the complaint as third-party interference in an active personnel matter, Patricia continued, and flagged the communication chain. Now it was final. Not because she spoke, because the system had responded. And external contact? I asked. Restricted, she said, immediately after the determination. That was correct. Not because it protected me, because it protected the structure. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Brandy had not shouted. She had not embarrassed herself. She had done something far more dangerous. She had almost sounded legitimate. And that was why this mattered. Because systems don't collapse under noise. They slow under doubt. And she had introduced just enough of it to be examined. Just not enough to survive. They've opened a secondary file, Patricia added quietly. Of course they had. Second files are not punishments. They are memory. And memory, inside institutions, travels further than intent. Thank you, I said. She didn't hang up immediately. Mrs. Crowder, she began, then stopped. Yes? She sounded certain. I allowed myself a small pause. Certainty, I said, is often the first sign someone doesn't understand the room. Patricia didn't respond. She didn't need to. By evening, the shift had already begun. Louise didn't step back immediately. She adjusted first. That was the difference between her and Brandy. She understood danger, even if she had misjudged where it lived. She called Brandy within the hour. Damon must have been there, because HR logged a follow-up contact less than 40 minutes later. This time, Brandy did not escalate. She softened. She asked whether the complaint could be clarified, then amended, then withdrawn before formal review. Each word smaller than the last, each one arriving too late. Paper doesn't unwrite itself once it has been received, logged, and circulated. It simply moves. And movement, inside systems like this, creates consequence whether you intended it or not. By the time Louise understood that, the structure had already closed around them. Later that evening, Damon called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Mama, he said. His voice had changed, not softened, strained. Yes. A pause. Did you know Brandy sent something to HR? I was informed. Silence. Longer this time. She said she was trying to help. He added. I didn't answer that. Because some statements don't need correction. They collapse on their own. He exhaled slowly. Louise is saying she didn't tell her to send it. Did she? I asked. Another silence, long enough to matter. I don't know anymore, he said. That was new. Not understanding, not accountability, but doubt. And doubt is where structure begins to break. She made it worse, didn't she? He asked. She made it visible, I said. That mattered more, because what had been contained was now recorded. I heard him swallow. Not loudly, but enough. I did not comfort him. Comfort would have been easy. And easy had already done enough damage. After we hung up, I remained where I was, my hand resting near the closed folder. Brandy believed visibility was a ladder. Louise taught her to climb where people could see her. But this was never a stage. And the company was never an audience. It was a structure. And once Brandy stepped into it without understanding its rules, the room didn't argue with her. It examined her. And once it finished examining, it simply adjusted around her. She thought she was forcing a door open. What she had actually done was walk into a room that keeps records and introduce herself permanently. Damon came back on Friday evening without calling first, but this time he did not knock like the house belonged to him. He knocked once, waited, then stepped back from the door. That distance said more than any apology could have. I watched him through the window for a moment before opening it. He wasn't dressed for anyone now. No tie, no pressed jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled unevenly, like he had done it without thinking. His face carried a different kind of tired. Not the sharp kind that comes from anger. Not the restless kind that comes from pride being challenged. This was quieter. The kind that comes when a man has run out of explanations that still make him feel right. "Mama," he said. I stepped aside. He entered slower this time, as if the house had weight again. His eyes moved toward Leonard's chair, and this time, he didn't look away immediately. He held it for a second, then another. Then he sat before I told him to. That was new. "I'm not here about the review," he said. His voice wasn't steady, not broken. Just careful. I closed the door behind him. "Then what are you here about?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight like he was holding something in place. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was measuring. "I messed up at work again on Wednesday," he said finally. That was not what I expected him to start with. I waited. "Calvin sent my report back," he continued. "Said I missed something I shouldn't have missed." He let out a small breath. "I almost argued with him. Almost. But I didn't," he added. I said nothing. He rubbed his thumb slowly against his palm. I wanted to say he was overreacting, that he was trying to prove a point, that he didn't like me. He looked up at me briefly. Then I realized I didn't even check the numbers properly. That landed differently. Not defensive, not polished, just stated. "I've been doing that," he said, moving fast, assuming things, thinking I can talk my way through what I didn't take time to do right. The room stayed still. Then he said, quieter now, "It's not just there." I waited. He swallowed once. I remembered something yesterday. There was hesitation now, not performance, not strategy. Something closer to discomfort. "When I was 16, he said, that interview downtown, the youth business program." I remembered. He had been nervous enough to pretend he wasn't. "You told me you had errands nearby," he said, "but I saw your car when I came out." I had errands, I said. He looked at me, not accusing, not amused, just looking. "For 3 hours?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap. He looked down again, nodding once like he was answering himself now. "I used to think that was just you being mama," he said. "Always around, always available." His voice tightened slightly. like it didn't cost anything. That landed. Not sharp. Deep. I've been thinking about that all week, he continued. About what I don't see, what I don't bother to look at because it's already there. He paused, then added, or because I assume it will always be there. I didn't interrupt. I remembered something Daddy said too. He went on. That night, after I got accepted, he shook his head lightly. He said, "A man who can't honor quiet help will lose loud blessings." A faint breath left him. I thought he meant saying thank you. He usually did, I said softly. Until he didn't. That almost pulled something like a smile from him. Almost. Then it faded. He leaned back slightly, then forward again, like he couldn't settle. At the mall. He started, then stopped. That was the part he still had to cross. I heard her, he said finally. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I heard every word, he continued, and I didn't say anything because... He let out a breath through his nose. Because it would have made things uncomfortable. There it was again. Comfort. He shook his head once, like even saying it out loud didn't sit right anymore. I told myself it wasn't that serious, he added, that it would pass, that you'd understand. I didn't respond to that. He glanced up at me, then looked away again. I've been doing that too, he said, deciding what matters based on what's easier in the moment. That was closer, not complete, but closer. I don't know when I started thinking like that, he admitted. You didn't start, I said. You allowed it. He nodded slowly. That felt right to him. After a moment, he said, quieter now. I don't like who that makes me. That was honest, but not finished. Not yet. The room held that truth without trying to soften it. After a while, he said, almost reluctantly, I should have said something. Not, I'm sorry. Not yet, but closer. I looked toward the window, then back at him. Yes, I said. That was all. He accepted that. That was new too. After a long pause, he added, Daddy would have been disappointed. Disappointed, I corrected gently, not ashamed. He looked up. Shame leaves a man nowhere to stand, I said. Disappointment expects him to rise. That stayed with him. I could see it settle, not as comfort, as responsibility. When he stood to leave, he didn't rush. He walked toward the door, then paused near Leonard's chair again. This time, he didn't avoid it. He rested his hand lightly on the back of it, just for a second. Then he said, almost to himself, build slow, stand straight, see people. Leonard's words, not the ones people repeat in public. The ones he used when no one was watching. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched him walk out. He hadn't changed, not fully, but something in him had stopped pretending it didn't need to. The review room did not feel like judgment. It felt like a mirror with no place to hide. Damon sat across from Marlon Reeves with his hands folded on the table, still enough to tell me he was working hard not to move. Brandy sat beside him, polished and tight-mouthed, her purse resting in her lap like armor. Louise had not come. That absence said plenty. I sat at the far end, not beside Damon, not across from him, in the seat assigned to me. Legacy Stakeholder. That was the title printed on the agenda, plain as morning. Brandy saw it before Damon did. Her eyes stopped on the page, then lifted toward me. For the first time since I had known her, she looked less offended than uncertain. Marlon began without ceremony. This meeting is to review the committee's findings, the remediation plan, and the interference concerns submitted after the decision. Brandy shifted. Interference? A woman from compliance, Judith Lane, opened a slim folder. A written complaint was submitted by a non-employee regarding an active personnel matter. It included references to donor relationships, outside influence, and reputational pressure. Brandy's mouth tightened. I was advocating for my husband. Judith's voice stayed even. You were attempting to influence an internal review process in which you have no standing. No one raised their voice. That made it worse. Marlon turned a page. The review predates the promotion announcement. The committee documented repeated judgment concerns, including delayed responses to compliance flags, informal pressure around vendor approval, and dismissive conduct toward junior staff. Damon looked down at the table. Brandy looked at him quickly, waiting for resistance. He gave none. Marlon continued. Mrs. Crowder did not initiate the review. She delayed escalation once based on developmental considerations. That delay has now been withdrawn. There it was. Not punishment. Withdrawal. Damon's eyes lifted slowly to mine. I could see him understanding the shape of it now. I had not built the consequence out of Saturday's pain. Saturday had only told me I could no longer stand between him and what was already written. Brandy leaned forward. So, she had influence. Yes, Marlon said. As a founding investor, board advisor, and legacy voting shareholder through the Hayes estate. The words sat cleanly in the room. Brandy blinked once. Damon closed his eyes for half a second. Judith added, Influence is not the same as improper interference. The committee findings are independently documented. Brandy turned to Damon then, her face sharpened by panic. You're just going to sit here? He looked at her. For one moment, I saw the old pattern try to rise in him, the need to soothe her, to protect the image, to make the room comfortable by bending truth until it fit everybody's pride. Then he breathed in. The review is fair, he said. Brandy stared at him like he had stepped away from her in public. Marlon did not smile. Judith did not react. I kept my hands still in my lap because something inside me had moved, and I did not trust my face to hide it. Damon looked back at the file on the table. I don't like it, he said, voice low, but it's fair. That was his first real decision. Consequence did not look like Damon being dragged out of a building. It looked like him sitting at a conference table, pen in hand, reading every line twice before signing something he could no longer talk his way around. No raised voices, no speeches, just terms. His title was reduced by 3 words. Those 3 words did not sound heavy when spoken aloud, but they changed everything. Not how people treated him outright, but how they adjusted around him. Conversations shortened, invitations shifted. Decisions that once paused for his input now moved past him, then circled back with instruction instead of consultation. Not cruel, professional. That was harder on him. Independent approval authority was suspended. Vendor decisions no longer stopped at his desk. They moved through Calvin Mercer first, a man who read documents the way some men read intentions, slowly and without assumption. The first visible shift came 3 days later. A vendor meeting Damon would normally lead was already in progress when he entered the room. No one stopped. No one turned. Calvin was at the head of the table, reviewing a file Damon recognized immediately, the same one he had once approved without slowing down to question it. Damon paused near the door, just for a second, waiting for the room to adjust. It didn't. Calvin glanced up briefly. You can sit in, he said. Not dismissive, not welcoming, just placed. Damon took a seat halfway down the table, not at the head, not beside it, halfway. The discussion continued. Numbers, terms, risk exposure. At one point, Damon spoke, not incorrectly, but not completely. Calvin didn't interrupt him. He let him finish, then he corrected the gap. Cleanly, without emphasis. without looking at him. The room absorbed it the way rooms like that always do, without reaction. That was the moment. Not loud, not humiliating, final. When the meeting ended, no one lingered. No one circled back to him. The file moved forward, without him. That was consequence, not removal, replacement. After that, everything else followed. Damon sat through his first formal review session without speaking more than necessary. I know that because Marlon mentioned it once, not as praise, but as observation. He listened, Marlon said. That's new. It was. Each week carried its own quiet correction. A report returned with red marks that were not harsh, just exact. A question asked in a meeting that Damon could not answer quickly anymore. A junior analyst speaking without waiting for Damon's approval. Nothing loud, just adjustments. The kind that leave no space to pretend nothing has changed. No one called it punishment. They called it remediation. Paper has a way of sounding merciful while removing every hiding place. Brandy felt it first, not the process, the shift. She stopped coming near the office after the second week. At first, she said it was because she didn't like the atmosphere. By the third week, she stopped asking Damon about his day. By the fourth, she had started correcting how he described it. They're trying to make an example out of you, she told him one night. Damon didn't argue. That bothered her more. Her name didn't collapse. It cooled. The invitation slowed, not rejected, not withdrawn. Just delayed. Messages answered with shorter replies. Smiles that ended a second earlier than they used to. The charity committee she once moved through comfortably began feeling structured. She had never noticed structure before. Louise noticed and stepped back. Not in a way anyone could point to. No dramatic absence, no public retreat. She simply stopped appearing in the same spaces at the same time. The calls to Winston Ashford ended. The casual mentions of donors disappeared. Her voice remained polished, but it no longer reached as far. She had learned something, just not soon enough to use it. At home, the change settled differently, not in arguments, in absence. Conversations that once filled rooms now ended at the edge of usefulness. Brandy still spoke, but Damon stopped agreeing just to keep the air calm. He didn't confront her. He didn't defend me. He just stopped adjusting. That was enough. The space between them began to hold things they didn't say. 3 weeks into the review period, Damon came by the house again. No announcement, no expectation. He stood in the doorway for a second before stepping inside, like he was remembering how to enter without assuming he belonged everywhere. His sleeves were rolled uneven. His hands carried that same restless stillness I had seen before. But this time, it wasn't trying to escape anything. It was settling. Calvin sent my vendor summary back, he said, standing near the dining table. Twice. I looked at him. Was he wrong? His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. No. That word landed differently than anything else he had said in weeks. He sat across from me and rubbed his hands together slowly, like he was measuring something invisible. Brandy says I'm letting them humiliate me. What do you say? I asked. He looked toward Leonard's chair, held it for a second, then looked back at me. I say I gave them the reason. That stayed in the room. Clean, not defensive, not rehearsed, just placed. Silence followed, but it didn't press. It waited. I stood and walked to the cabinet beneath the bookcase. He watched me, but didn't ask. That was new. Once, he would have filled the space with questions, trying to stay ahead of whatever was coming. Now he let it arrive. I took out the folder, not quickly, not with intention to impress, just brought it forward. His eyes followed it to the table. When I opened it, something in him stilled completely. There was his name, Damon Crowder, typed into documents prepared long before the parking lot, before the review, before the demotion. Before Brandy understood, there were rooms she had never entered. His fingers hovered above the page, but didn't touch it. "What is this?" he asked. I sat down across from him. "Something your father and I built carefully," I said. "Something we were preparing you for." He didn't respond. He just read, line by line. Slowly now. Legacy shares, trust access, development sponsorship, stewardship conditions. Each word landed heavier than the last, not because of what it promised, because of what it required. His face changed, not with excitement, not with pride, with recognition. He wasn't seeing opportunity. He was seeing distance, the space between who he thought he was becoming and what this actually demanded of him. He leaned back slightly, like the chair needed to hold more of his weight than before. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. That was the problem. He looked down at his name again, and for the first time since this began, he didn't try to claim it. 6 months later, Damon knew the security guard's name again. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his title, not his office, not whether people had started smiling at him differently. Names. He stood near the lobby desk one rainy Tuesday morning, holding a folded umbrella in one hand, asking the guard how his daughter's nursing program was going. Not as a performance, not loudly, not waiting for anyone important to pass by and witness it. Just asking. The man's face opened in that quiet, unguarded way people only allow when they feel seen without being measured. That told me more than any quarterly report ever could. Damon did not climb back quickly. He stopped trying to. Calvin Mercer sent his work back when it was thin, and Damon corrected it without muttering about disrespect. He started arriving earlier, not to be noticed, but because he no longer trusted himself to rush through anything important. Junior staff began entering meetings without tightening their shoulders. That shift did not come from anything Damon announced. It came from what he stopped doing. He listened longer. He asked questions he would have once answered too quickly. He checked details twice, and once, only once, but properly. He apologized to the analyst he had dismissed during the vendor approval mess. No witnesses, no explanations, no attempt to soften it. That made it count. Brandy did not understand that kind of rebuilding. To her, correction looked like humiliation. Delay looked like failure. Silence looked like loss. Every evening, Damon came home tired from learning discipline under supervision. She treated it like something had been taken from them. "You're letting them shrink you," she told him once. He told me later, he answered, "No, I'm learning how much space I was taking." She did not have a reply for that. Their marriage did not break in one loud moment. It thinned. At breakfast, where conversation shortened. In car rides, where silence stayed longer than comfort. In the way Louise stopped calling as often, her advice losing shape without the influence she thought she had secured. In the shift from our future to your situation. Damon did not argue with Brandy loudly. He did not defend me in speeches or confrontations. He simply stopped adjusting the truth to keep her comfortable. That was enough to change the house they lived in. And for the first time, I saw something Brandy had never prepared for. A man who no longer needed to impress her. As for the folder, I did not sign anything. Not then. Not after 6 months. Not even after I saw the change begin to settle into something steadier than apology. Because inheritance is not a reward for remorse, and legacy is not a bandage for consequences. I took the folder out once, placed it on the table, and let Damon read it fully this time. Not quickly, not with shock, with the weight it was always meant to carry. His name, written into something he had never earned the right to assume. When he finished, he didn't look at me immediately. He just sat there. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know." "I know," I said. That was the problem. I closed the folder and placed it back in the cabinet. "When you are ready," I told him, "the path will still be there. But I will not confuse potential with proof again." He nodded. No argument. No attempt to negotiate. Just something in him trying to become consistent enough to be trusted. That mattered more than anything he could have said. That evening, after he left, I returned to Leonard's chair by the window. The same chair, the same angle of light, the same quiet. But the room no longer felt like a place where something had been taken from me. It felt like a place where something had been corrected. I sat there and let memory move without rushing it. My father's hands, steady on wood that would outlast him. My mother's eyes, reading people before they spoke themselves into trouble. Leonard, refusing to build anything that required applause to stand. And then finally, myself. The part I had mistaken for love. I spent years making sure Damon never saw what I was doing for him. Not because I wanted recognition, because I thought invisibility would make him stronger. It didn't. It made him comfortable. Comfortable enough to stop looking. Comfortable enough to believe what he had was simply his. That was my mistake. Not loving him, but hiding the weight of that love so well that he never learned to recognize it. That truth still sat heavy, but it no longer confused me. Outside, rain tapped against the glass, steady and patient. Somewhere across town, my son was learning to stand without the invisible hand he had mistaken for air. My father built things that lasted. So did Leonard. So did I. The difference now is this. What I built will no longer hide itself to be appreciated. And my son, he will have to learn to see it before he is ever allowed to carry it.